Also the people outside, please come in again, join us for the next session. We first have two other presentations, huh? We first have, yeah. The person sitting over there, you just nod to him and then he will change the slides. No, I don't need it. I'm not sure if the presenters need it. Shall I put it away for a second? If needed, then we can... Nina, will you use this mic or do you want the stand? Whatever you prefer.
I can use that one.
Okay, that's fine. Please all take your seats so we can start. Maybe the team can help to get everybody in. There will be plenty of time during lunch to connect, I promise you. So, I believe we had a wonderful morning part where we truly set the scene together for subnational island jurisdictions and overseas territories. Let's now hear from two tangible projects, what the possibilities are concerning financing mechanisms for islands. Lina today will tell us more about the Green Overseas program and the interesting opportunities they found when looking into financing mechanisms for our islands. Lina, the floor is yours. And please give her a big applause.
Thank you very much. All protocol being established, good morning to everybody. Thank you for having the Green Overseas program here today with you. I'm looking forward to some interesting exchanges with all of you. So the Green Overseas, we can go one slide back, thank you. The Green Overseas program is a 17.8 million program funded by the European Union, and it's implemented by Expertise France, which is part of the French Bilateral Development Agency. I am the regional coordinator for the Caribbean of the Green Overseas program, and I'm based in Sint Maarten. The program aims to contribute to the sustainable, resilient, and inclusive development of the EU and UK overseas countries and territories. The program was approved prior to the Brexit, so this is why we have the pleasure to work with the UK and EU overseas countries and territories within this program. And we're located in the red quadrant that James was presenting earlier for you to see what we are talking about in terms of geography. The mission of the Green Overseas program entails to contribute to the low-carbon energy transition in the OCTs and also to fostering climate change resilience. And as a third pillar, we're also looking into how to fund these purposes. Now, in this presentation, I will showcase only one part of the Green Overseas program, and that is the Green Overseas Climate Finance Community. It's a community of practice for OCTs, UK and EU, to share best practices and to develop new solutions for enabling greater access to climate finance. So I'm very pleased to share some of the insights that have been coming out of the Go Climate Finance community, and to also identify together with you some broader perspectives for new collaborations. Now, this slide here is a snapshot of the Go Climate Finance community. The timeline of the different work streams. I'm not going to go into detail about all of this, but what we're doing mainly is webinars, some baseline studies. We had a major climate finance forum that happened last year in October. And we're doing some online trainings as well, all in the field of climate finance. We're looking into public funding, bilateral and multilateral. We're looking into private finance, and we're looking into public financial resilience. We can go to the next one, please. Now, this is a photo that was taken during the Green Overseas Climate Finance Forum that was organized in October 2024 in Brussels, and that united more than 200 delegates from overseas countries and territories to speak about the exact same topic that we're speaking about today, which is access to climate finance. So it brought together practitioners and also delegates from the OCTs, financial institutions, and the European Union. Next slide, please. During the forum, we had cartoonists with us. So these are some of the examples of the cartoons that have been drawn during the forum, and which we found not only a fun exercise during the forum, but also a very effective means of communication, of making the point about the issues that are faced in OCTs regarding climate finance. So here we have one cartoon about the climate hazard map with hazards basically all over the place. And then, yeah, looking at the funding next to it. I can't really see it very well from here, but I think you can see it much better than me, which is the point of this presentation. So we can go to the next one. We had a baseline study being done to get a handle on the problem. This is always what we do to start something, even though we're maybe a little bit tired of seeing studies, but it's just to pose the baseline. We did a number of desk reviews, questionnaires, bilateral consultations, and champion workshops to get everything together. And we can go to the next slide. Now, one of the highlights of all of this work, the baseline study, was the question, is there enough funding? And as you can see, no was the majority response. And this cartoon also takes up this message, that there is not enough funding, but, exactly on this slide, but the study also found that there actually is funding available for overseas countries and territories. And so we studied 148 public climate funds and analyzed those that are available. And out of these, 68 actually are also available for overseas countries and territories. Most of them are grants, but there are different types of funding mechanisms available. And most of them, in terms of sources of donors, are national development agencies, but there are also other types accessible to the OCTs. This is another highlight of this work that has been done in the framework of the baseline study. What are the obstacles that are experienced by OCTs in accessing climate funds? And here are the top 3 responses that came up. So 1, analyzing and understanding the climate funding opportunities. This is what is highlighted by the maze that you see in the cartoon. The ecosystem of available funding is just so complicated and difficult to maneuver. So second top response in terms of barriers is producing the expected administrative requirements, where most OCTs have limited capacity to fill in these pages and pages of documents that you generally need to submit your applications for funding. And then matching with existing institutional policies was also highlighted as one of the main obstacles. Now, this looks like a really complicated chart. It was our attempt to clarify the playing field that we are looking at in terms of climate funding for overseas countries and territories. And there are just 3 boxes that I would like to focus on that you can see here. One is on the top center, let's say, so bilateral public funds, which was also the main source of funding that we identified in terms of numbers of different funding mechanisms for OCTs. Then there's access to EU thematic and horizontal programs. And here I would like to give some compliments to the BES Special Envoy Cabinet, because you're doing a great job on demystifying this part of this chart. And then the third one is to unlock access to global and multilateral funds. So we can group the public funding into these 3 boxes. And yeah, I guess the presentations will be available to everybody afterwards, right? Yeah, I think so. So you will have a chance to look at this in more detail later on. Yeah, there was much interest at the Climate Finance Forum about unlocking global multilateral funds, and we have heard a bit about the legal aspects that are surrounding these just earlier today. Yeah, but I will not go into detail. I don't have the time right now. Thank you. Then what we also developed as part of the Green Overseas Climate Finance community are some tools and resources. So here are 2 of them that are accessible online. One is what we call the OCT Marketplace tool. This one helps to explore opportunities for private finance to support different projects in the OCTs. And the other one is what we call the OCT Climate Fund Explorer. This is more centered on public funding that is available. And the idea is to help OCTs navigate through the different types of funding mechanisms that are available. Now, following up on the Green Overseas Climate Finance Forum, we started to put into place what we call the Expert Working Group on Climate Finance. So all of the OCTs that are part of the Green Overseas Initiative were invited to designate a person to follow up on what was discussed during the forum and to help us elaborate a work plan with different projects that are currently being either implemented already or designed or are in the pipeline to be designed and then implemented. And all of these follow-up actions basically concentrate on 3 pillars. One is increasing awareness. This is also part of trying to demystify what is out there in terms of funding mechanisms. Then capacity building, providing technical assistance, potentially a regional mechanism for some of the OCTs to be able to submit applications to the different funding sources that are available. And then the third pillar, to work on eligibility criteria and do some advocacy towards different eligibility criteria to the main climate funds that are out there and make them suitable for OCTs. So in this framework, we're working, for example, on a study that looks more into the Paris Agreement and how OCTs relate to it, how they could become parties or get extension of their mother state, let's say, to the Paris Agreement, and then through this being able to access some of the major climate funds. And another activity within this pillar is going to be a study that will focus on the multidimensional vulnerability index that was mentioned twice already this morning as an alternative indicator for eligibility to climate funds. So really focusing on vulnerability and not making GDP the main indicator. So this is, of course, advocacy work that we can do. We cannot decide on these eligibility criteria and just change them, but it's really advocacy. And for this, we need to get together. We need to get the OCTs together, maybe also the SNIJ in a more broader framework to carry this advocacy further. Yeah, this is a photo from the Climate Finance Forum. We had the OCT youth present there as well, because just to keep in mind that we are also doing this work for the future generations and involve them in the work. In terms of networking of advocacy in the Green Overseas program, we have been and will be present at different major international events related to climate change, and to carry this message further, difficulties to access climate finance for OCTs within these fora. And we'll be happy to meet some of you in the upcoming ones, I hope. Yes, thank you very much. Just a little message, if you want more information about Green Overseas or to link up with us, here's my email address. And the other point is the platform of Green Overseas, which is the platform on which we put all of the resources that are collected or elaborated in the framework of the program. For this, you would have to create a login, but it's very simple. You can go to platform.green-overseas.org. And on this, you will find the tools that I just mentioned, and also the different studies that have already been done or that will be done in the upcoming 2 years. So thank you very much. Looking forward to linking up with you and carry this further together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lina. And I hope that everybody goes online and will register, because indeed it's a very good and interesting platform to learn from. There is a beautiful example of a trust fund for climate change for islands. The British Virgin Islands proved that it can work. I've heard her story a couple of times already, but she keeps impressing me with how BVI did this. Without further ado, let me introduce to you Mrs. Angela Burnett-Penn, Climate Change Officer of the Government of BVI.
Pleasant good afternoon to everyone. I hope I'm not the one standing between you and lunch. But it's my pleasure to be able to speak today on the Virgin Islands Climate Change Trust Fund, which I hope can serve as a model not just for my fellow overseas territories, but also independent neighboring islands in the Caribbean as you seek to enhance your ability to access international climate finance. So as you may know, the Virgin Islands is one of 6 British overseas territories in the Caribbean, and while we're all unique in our own way, we do share a common vulnerability profile. We are small islands that are geographically isolated, and we have, if you can switch to the next slide, we have fragile environments that underpin our very fragile, often tourism-based economies, and we're prone to natural hazards. And this is the same vulnerability profile of SIDS. So we are equally vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. The pictures that you see on the screen are from recent events in the Virgin Islands, and we know the impacts of climate change all too well, including, rise in temperatures, enhanced flood events, stronger hurricanes, sea level rise, coral bleaching, etc. But we have very unequal access to, and in fact I would say lack of access to, traditional international climate finance. The point was made on the panel a while ago, but just to reiterate, if you think of the tree of funds that are out there, you name it and we can't access it. Sorry, the graphic has deformed a little bit, but the GEF, or the Global Environment Facility, we can't access. The Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund, the most recent Loss and Damage Fund. As a result of Brexit, we can no longer access EU funds, and as was said before, the EDF, or the European Development Fund, was actually historically a very important means of development finance for us. And because of our relatively high GDP per capita, we cannot access concessional loans either. And then it often comes as a surprise to persons that although we are an overseas territory of the United Kingdom, we also cannot access UK international development aid. And this is as a result of our constitutional arrangements. And I'll speak specifically to the case of the Virgin Islands because our arrangements are all, different in some ways. But essentially, in a nutshell, the UK is responsible for our international affairs and defense. But we have internal self-governance, and we're responsible for our own socioeconomic development. In fact, since 1972, so over 50 years ago now, we no longer receive grant and aid from the UK, which means that our budget is entirely independent of the UK. There's no contribution. And mention was made of the fact that we received some assistance from the UK following Hurricane Irma. I just want to make it clear that that was not in the form of grant assistance, but the offer of a loan guarantee. So essentially, we've been financially independent for as long as many of the independent Caribbean countries. So I don't want to give the impression that we receive no assistance from the UK. I think mention has already been made of initiatives like the Darwin Initiative and the Blue Belt Program, which have been extremely important for us in the space of environment and biodiversity. But you'd appreciate that that leaves a major gap in terms of the other needs around climate adaptation and mitigation. So the story of the Virgin Islands has very much been one of making our own way or finding a solution for ourselves. As we have heard many times this week, we smile, but we, all right. So ours is a story of finding our own path through this maze. And I just want to share a bit of the timeline of the development of the Virgin Islands Climate Change Trust Fund, so you can appreciate that it has not been an overnight journey. Without trying to age myself, I will say that I've been with this from the beginning of the journey. This idea was born in the halls of COP15 in Copenhagen in 2009, which was the very first time that overseas territories had the opportunity to attend a COP, if you can believe that. And that was through a regional program that was run by the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center. And it became blatantly clear to all of us that the overseas territories were very much on the margins, if we could have even said that, of the conversation on international climate finance, and that that position was not going to change anytime soon. So we agreed among ourselves that we had to take matters into our own hands. And so in 2012, when we developed our first climate change policy, that policy included a mandate for the development of a sustainable financing mechanism to support the implementation of the policy. And that triggered a series of events that culminated in the passage of the Virgin Islands Climate Change Trust Fund Act in 2015. The act came into force in 2016. And then we had to go through quite a long period, maybe about 6 months of public sensitization around the trust fund and the unique process that we would go through to appoint a board, because it was an open, transparent, public process. So in July of 2017, shortly before Hurricane Irma in September, our first board of trustees was appointed, and they really did a lot of great work in a short amount of time, with the support I have to highlight from the OECS Commission through the GCC Island Resilience Project. We were able to, for example, develop our operational manual, which governs in great detail all of the operations of the trust fund. And I should highlight here that that manual establishes things at a level that if one day we are able to, we could actually become accredited to the Green Climate Fund. But at minimum, we could be accredited as an indirect access entity. So that's extremely helpful. And then you see that red line. We've heard a lot this week about the importance of political will, and I want to also highlight here the importance of technical champions. And when you have the absence of either one of those, you see things tend to grind to a halt in our region. So in 2009, we had the two of those realities occurring at the same time. We had a change in government in April 2019, and at about the same time, in April 2019, I also left the territory. I'm not suggesting any direct cause-effect relationship here. So basically, nothing happened for about a 5 to 7 year period. But thankfully, we've been able to get things back on track. And in March of this year, we've had another significant milestone with the regulations being passed that would actually provide a guarantee for seed funding for the trust fund. So now we're full steam ahead. And we're planning to internationally launch our fund at COP30 this year. So we're very much looking forward to that milestone. I just want to quickly highlight that the trust fund does not exist in isolation. It's part of a wider architecture for our climate change response. So we have a multi-sectorial climate change committee that's responsible for updating and coordinating the implementation of our climate change policy. And the climate change policy supported by the implementation plan is really what guides the funding priorities of the trust fund. That policy is, of course, approved by Cabinet. Cabinet also approves the members of the board of the trust fund and receives their annual report. You'll see in a moment that the trust fund is an independent entity, but there is a high-level oversight function that is played by the ministers responsible for climate change, as well as the Minister for Finance. So just to give you a sense, our climate change policy is quite comprehensive. There are 133 specific policy directives across 12 different sectors, which really covers everything impacted by climate change. We're in the process of updating that policy, with the update expected to come out sometime this summer. And if you switch to the next slide, yeah, it's really comprehensive, not just in terms of the sectors covered, but in terms of the types of activities that need to happen to really adapt in a comprehensive way and to look at mitigation as well. So it's not just about physical adaptation projects like improved drainage or water capture and storage or coastal defense, but it also looks at things like ecosystem-based adaptation initiatives, coral nurseries, for example, to beach restoration, mangrove replanting. And we appreciate the need as well for enhanced data, enhanced legislative and policy frameworks, public awareness, better disaster risk reduction, and a number of innovative initiatives. So the Climate Change Trust Fund is able to support any of these sort of activities and projects. If you switch to the next slide. And then I just want to highlight, without going into much detail here, that there are 6 core principles that underpin the trust fund. And you would see these expressed in the Act as well as in the operational manual. First and foremost is that the trust fund is independent. It is an independent entity of government, and that's embedded deeply in the legislation that establishes it. So the monies of the trust fund are entirely separate from government monies. The Act actually explicitly states that the money of the trust fund is not public funds. The trust fund is governed at the highest level by the Board of Trustees, and while that board is appointed by Cabinet, no member of Cabinet, not even the Premier, is able to overturn the decisions of the board. And Cabinet cannot, without cause, dismiss members of the board. But there are a number of checks and balances built into the legislation and the operational manual to ensure that the board doesn't go rogue and actually, makes decisions in line with the priorities established in our climate change policy. Hand in hand with independence is the transparency principle. Every decision that is made by the trust fund is public. Everything about where it would access funds and how those funds are spent. Some of the mechanisms that ensure that is the requirement for an annual report that is made public, as well as the fact that the trust fund's accounts are actually open to inspection on demand at any time. When we were establishing the trust fund, we recognized the importance of making sure that all actors that need to be involved in the climate change response have access to finance. We appreciate that this is not something that government can do alone. So you'll see that not just government, but NGOs, academic institutions, even registered associations like community groups, as well as the private sector, can access grants through the Virgin Islands Climate Change Trust Fund. There are a number of provisions in the Act and the OM that ensure responsible resource management. So for example, there's a limit on the amount of the fund or the percentage of the fund that can be spent on administrative expenses. So we don't have a fund that's just there sitting paying secretariat salaries and expenses, but is really heavily invested in the work that needs to be done. There are also, for example, requirements for quarterly financial statements and annual externally audited reports on the activities of the fund. And then in the legislation, we've sought to ensure that even though our space is limited, we really look at having a blended source of funds coming into the trust fund. So the opportunities are wide open as far as the legislation is written. It can come from levies, it can come from donations from independently wealthy persons, and I think thankfully in the Virgin Islands we have a lot of opportunity in that space. We have a nice collection of multi-millionaires and multi-billionaires that own private islands and have other real interests in the Virgin Islands, and perhaps that represents an opportunity with this sort of mechanism in place for them to really make some contributions to climate resilience. But there are also opportunities in the carbon market space. The Virgin Islands is now looking into green bonds and blue bonds. So we try to make sure for resiliency purposes, we have blended sources of finance. And then finally, the trust fund really empowers donors to be very specific, if they would like, about how their contributions are utilized. And then finally, as I wrap up, next slide. Oh, sorry, I forgot, this is an important point. That delay that I talked about actually had some benefit. So right now, just out of the starting blocks, the fund is currently capitalized at over 5.5 million US dollars, and that is representative of 40% of an environmental and tourism levy that has been in place now since 2017, $10 a head on every tourist that enters the Virgin Islands, with the exception of cruise ship passengers. So this puts us in a really good position to not just be able to hire on a secretariat, but also do some initial calls for proposals, even in the absence of getting independent donations. So next slide as I wrap up. Yeah, just to quickly say, there are a number of documents that guide the operations of the fund, including the OM, which I've already mentioned, as well as the business plan, which is really the document that will guide us in identifying the viable fundraising streams or options for us. And then there are different documents on a 2 to 3 year timeline and an annual timeline that determine the spending priorities of the trust fund. And next slide. The structure of the fund is fairly simple. Like I said, at the highest level, you have a board of trustees that's comprised of 9 members. 6 of those are non-government members. The other members include the CEO of the fund, the financial secretary, as well as a permanent secretary in the ministry responsible for climate change. The board has the opportunity to set up a review committee, which will be comprised of both government and non-government experts to help guide it on technical review of applications for funding. And then the day-to-day operations of the trust fund are dealt with by the secretariat, which is headed by a CEO, supported by a deputy director for operations, a manager of revenues, and a manager of a finance, admin, and legal department. And then if you're looking for a new exciting career opportunity, I want to take this opportunity to flag that we've actually, in the course of this week, launched an advertisement for the Chief Executive Officer. The application deadline is June 30th. So if you think you might be interested and qualified or know somebody who may be, I direct you to the Trust Fund's website, vicctf.org, to get more information about that. And I just want to end with a wide open invitation for you to partner with us. Yes, of course, we're looking for donors, but we're also looking for partners to help us through the operationalization phase of the trust funds. So maybe existing funds, regional institutions with technical capacity that we can learn lessons from. So I thank you, and we look forward to your full support as we launch at COP this year.
Thank you so much, Angela, for this wonderful presentation. So are we ready for lunch? Yeah? So we thought that already, so this is why we're skipping a little bit the program and going to turn it a little bit around and going to give you the opportunity to have some lunch now. But before you do, we would really love to make a group photo with each and every one of you. And Kata, I think it's going to be outside? Okay, so in front of the building, we're going to make a group photo with everybody. After that, you can have a wonderful lunch here. You can even go for a quick walk along the beach. And we would like to start again at 2 p.m.